Jing. I had the pleasure of meeting her at a architecture meetup organized in San Francisco. Kudos to Violet for such an amazing event, and we had shared each other's work. And I thought, like, I gotta have her on the show. She has an amazing background from architecture to product designer, and she works at Polycam, which is like, I love the product, amazing work. So I thought it would be great to host you on this. So thanks a lot, Lai Jing, for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. This is my first time doing a stream. Fingers crossed. We'll see how this work goes. Yeah.
I see. Lai Jing, can you like share a bit about your background, where you grew up, what you studied, and various roles of your professional journey?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I'm Lai Jing. Well, I grew up in Hong Kong. And so I studied there until I was how old? 14, I think, like grade 8, and then very much a local school. And then I went to abroad to, actually, I then went to an international school, and then I went abroad, and I studied in the UK for like my last 2 years of high school, and then I went to um, university to study architecture. And so I studied in the UK, and then. Um, Let me see. It's a very long story. I'm trying to see how I can cut this shorter. But then after the UK, I worked in China for a bit, and then I went to study my master's back in Hong Kong University. And then I had the opportunity to go to Columbia to do a program called Critical, Curatorial, and Conceptual Practices in Architecture, which is mostly research. So I was going to go into sort of like, I was looking to go into curatorial practice, and it's very much an art history type program. Think about it that way, even though it has a convoluted name. So you would work in museums or publications. So then I went back to Hong Kong, and I kind of tried to utilize that degree, but um, eventually I realized quite quickly to advance there, I would have to get a PhD. And so I applied, and then I went to Berkeley to do that. Um, and then after a year being in Berkeley, long story short, I decided academia is kind of too nebulous of an industry to continue into, like. And then I was quite, because it was also a very long journey, so I was like, what if I end up um after I graduate, like, which is several years later, like that, like I can't make a life out of it, right? So I think that was the big reason why I had wanted to get out. And because I was in a PhD program, living on like a very, very meager stipend, I decided the only way is up. Like I could literally work in a grocery store and I would make more money. Like there was very, very, the low stakes are very, very low. So, and then I recalled back in Colombia, like my favorite class, or the one that, or not just the class, but like in the industry that I was in before, which is sort of cultural industry. I really enjoyed like graphic design. I had a really cool professor that taught that. So I kind of wanted to go into, when I thought industry and I didn't want to go back into architecture. That's why I even did the curatorial program in the first place. Like I didn't want to design buildings anymore. So I thought maybe I'll brush up in like my graphic skills and like go into publications or something like that. But then I realized that doesn't really quite exist in the West Coast, and like in the Bay Area, like tech industry is what's booming, and a lot of people who are in traditional print were going into that anyway. So I thought, oh, let's just skip that step. So I kind of then like went into um product design, and that was in itself, of course, a long journey. Like anybody who has tried would know, like breaking into tech is a journey. um and I think I didn't even know UX at the beginning. Like I left the program in summer, I didn't know what I was going to do. But I think someone gave me an advice, which was like, do something that you always enjoyed, like growing up as a hobby, because you're not going to have this, see it as an opportunity, like to just like kind of recover yourself by doing something you enjoy. And I recalled that when I was little, like really enjoyed designing websites. I actually went back into Wayback Machine and I found some of the stuff that I did when I was like 14 years old, and I felt like that was a sign. Anyway, um, so long story short, I like then tried to brush up on that, like learned about how like HTML and CSS evolved over the years, and like I think technology has changed with like Web 2, right? So I was just kind of like as a hobby, like how to put back a website together, and from there, I think like the algorithms started to shoot me a lot of like UX related information, and that's how I discovered it. And then I was like, "What's UX?" I didn't even know what it stood for. Saw the acronym, but like I was like, "Okay." And then from there, I was like, and this was back in 2018 too, so it was a little bit more less like saturated, as they call it. Like it was still quite in its like early, more optimistic days, I guess. So I think that was how I got started, and then I did Springboard. I was like the first cohort um, of their UX career track program. So like at that time, I think it's a fun fact, like the curriculum wasn't even ready. Like we only got shown half of the curriculum. And then yeah, so I did it pretty quickly because I did the UX, not the UX UI. So like it was a much shorter program. UX UI came later, but like as a program, but UX was 6 months. So after 6 months, they had like an industry design module, which then I got paired with a company and they really liked me. So afterwards, I worked there for another year. And then, yeah, and then the rest is history now. Like I just kind of kept going, working at different startups and things. So yeah.
That's amazing. So like that 6 months at that bootcamp really like onboarded you in the journey of UX, where before that you were quite beginner. And
Hmm.
can you like share a bit like what were the various topics or skills you learned throughout that bootcamp that made you eligible for that UX job?
Yeah, it was, I think as an architect, a lot of that was very like I remember getting very excited about the curriculum. It was not difficult. Like you've done way more difficult things in architecture, right? Like, but the curriculum is 90% design thinking, and it's a little bit now when we look back at it, it's a little bit of the naive days. Like now, I think there's more and more things like as designers where we have a lot of pressure to catch up and learn about. Like it's definitely probably at this point like that whole curriculum is only about 20% of what I need to do to succeed now, like given where I am now. Like there's so much you have to keep learning, and that keeps piling up. It's a mountain. But at that time I was in such simpler days there. um I was so excited about the curriculum because the beginning part was just about what's design thinking, what is user-centric design, and what is the double diamond, right? Like the double diamond process. How do you do research to validate if there is a market need for this certain idea? Like, and I at that time I was like, if only I knew this in architecture like day one, like it would have reached. I think a lot of things in my journey after I left, I could like UC Berkeley was like, I wish I knew this from the beginning in architecture. Although I don't know how you would user test the building, but I'm sure there are ways like you could easily think of in architecture where like get some feedback from actual users of your building. Like I think there must be ways. I can't, even though that it's less iterative, but you prototype, right? Like there are ways. So I feel like that's one of them. I also felt like so a little a side note is that before I got into UX, actually for a few months even, I put together a little like graphic design curriculum for myself. Because I was trying to learn this new skill and I just came out of academia. So my immediate impulse is I have to write myself a curriculum because like that's what
Oh.
everyone did. So yeah, so I was like, let me put together a syllabus for myself to learn graphic design. And then And then in that process, I realized also like visual design and graphic design is the sort of 101 basic principles, like even just like color theory or like gestalt theory, like those things would have helped me immensely in architecture. And I like wish, because architecture is just like adding one more dimension, but for some reason, I don't feel like in school we really learned that. Like when we jumped, even in my first year, when we jumped into just like designing maybe a simpler residential building, but like we never learned those basics of like just visual design, how to
Yeah.
see things, you know? Like I feel like those elements would have really transformed the way I had done like building design if I had a chance to do it again. So like, and you know, who knows, maybe I will. But I think, yeah, I think it's a very long-winded answer, but I don't know if I answered your question. But yeah, so oh, sorry, yes, long detour coming back to what you said. Yeah, the thing that excited me about the UX curriculum was that it really taught you how to connect with business, um, which is something I did not learn or didn't get to learn. Like I didn't feel very relevant to the world when I was doing architecture. You felt like you're this protected bubble, like doing creative design, even though it's a business. Like architecture is a business, you don't really get that. Um, I think when you think about business and architecture, really think about like bookkeeping, right?
Yeah.
Like the very technical, like accounting aspects or like building regulations, like connecting in that way. But like when I did UX, you're really thinking about like finding product market fit and like talking to users and developing these sort of skills that are, I feel like you can take away as an individual and survive in the world. You know, I don't really have to explain it more, but like they're trying to articulate the value of design in the business world. And that was something we never talked about in architecture. And I think that was what really inspired me to begin that journey. Yeah. I'll shut up.
No, no, no. You covered a lot, like from design thinking to
Yeah.
color theory to like
Yeah.
diamond models. And
Yeah.
like, what was the toughest part in this learning?
Sorry.
What was like the toughest thing you had to learn, or
Um,
or biasness overcome, where you had to unlearn what you did in architecture to learn this thing?
yeah. That's a very good question. What did I have to unlearn? Hmm. Let me think about this question. I don't know because I feel like a lot of things in architecture was helpful, but I did come about it from like an architecture. Like because I don't know what I don't know. I haven't lived another life. It's hard to see. There's nothing like super stands out to me. Um, hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I think one of the things, if I have to say, is probably, I don't know if it's a direct answer to your question, but in architecture, you kind of work in a team of other architects and other AEC people at most, right? They're all usually day to day, you're interacting with people who have the same background as you. Whereas in the thing that's hardest for me to get used to at the beginning is working with many different other multidisciplinary people. So like people who come from very different backgrounds who think vastly different from you. And by that I mean um you have this feeling of false geniusness, I guess. Like you think like, oh, I must be really smart, much more smarter than them. But that's actually not true. It's just that you have a different skill set and they're better at you at something else. And I think like that is something like I would caution like most architects like to just like um uh be more subdued and like observe a little more because I think that's the main thing. Like I think a lot of people accomplish a lot of things in this world because um they have very different ways of thinking even if you don't get it in the beginning. I think that's the biggest thing. So like um yeah, I think especially in, but I do enjoy that aspect a lot now. Like being able to work with people with so different skill sets, because it's a lot more fun to work in a to play in a team where it's kind of like a football team, right? Or a basketball team, where you know you have the goalie, the center back, and like everyone's doing something different. Like that's kind of fun. Like it's actually a lot less fun to work with everybody who has exactly the same training as you. Actually, I find that to be the hardest part. Like working with people who are very similar to you is actually sometimes harder. I don't know how you feel about it. I think different people have different characteristics, but yeah, personalities. So my personality is such that I enjoy working with people who are very different. So yeah, I guess that's the main thing. That's the thing that you kind of need to not unlearn, but like the biggest learning curve is learning with working with different people. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
And can can you share a bit like how a week in a life of a UX person look like? The work, meeting systems and tools they use.
Um let me see. I think the good thing about the Springboard curriculum that I did was that you get a pretty good walkthrough of all the fundamental UX toolkit, I guess. And so it's very much less like teaching you how to use Figma. So but you learn a lot of the very important principles. So I think like I pretty much span the gamut. I do use pull everything you can. So really depends on the project. My company thankfully gives us, they really value research, which is, from what I hear, not a very common thing. Like even in the past companies I worked in, I rarely get like, give you 2 months to do research, like never. But here they do value that a lot. So, so if I am in like a research heavy stretch of the year, then like now is the beginning of the year, I guess. Then my my work is probably 60% research. So doing a lot of user interviews, digging into data, like trying to find anything noteworthy to like share with the team. And then and then I think all the leadership will like come together and like, you know, put their minds together and decide what to do next. But like some other times of the year, like the end of last year, would be very much like implementation. Like, you know, like
Mm.
it's not so much that, oh, we do research at the beginning of the year and then implement. But like it's, I'm not trying to say we're a waterfall in that strict sense, but it's just like at the end of the year, typically you wind down by like doing more, like ship more things and like try to end the year. So like so in the end of last year, it was a lot more like, oh, finessing some details and like shipping these feature updates. But I think like every different month of the year is just kind of like that ratio changes, you know. So,
Mm,
but but on a regular day or week, I would do everything. Like there would be a little bit of implementation, a little bit of research, a little bit of design. Like, it's really everywhere. It depends on the need of the team at the time. Yeah, but it is very wide ranging. Yeah. So there's like a little bit of like looking into like reviewing PRs and things like that, and then there's a little bit of like, oh, user interview, you know. Yeah.
I see. And
Yeah.
like just for the clarification, like UX
Mm,
involves a lot of like user interviews. When you say Figma, a lot of people might think okay, it's couples with UI as well with Figma prototypes. And
mm-hmm,
I've seen like people also using Miro for like doing user interview, finding like
mm,
taking notes, cluster of items, what are the common trends, and
mm-hmm,
then giving out outputs and recommendations. So and now you have like product designer role. So just for the clarification, like how does product designer is different than a UX person?
mm. Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I don't think anyone calls themselves a UX designer anymore, but correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like maybe in like a very big company that role still exists. Like if you're in like Google or something, I think they still have UX as a title. But honestly, I've also interviewed a bunch in the past, and when you know when these different titles come up, and I ask them, they're like, "Oh, they mean the same thing." So I'm like, okay. I mean, honestly, it really depends on who's saying it. I think, but I think recruiters probably definitely don't know those like nuances, right? When they are recruiting, how would they know? Like, if you're not in the profession, you probably wouldn't know the difference between UX, UI, and product. You probably don't care enough to figure it out either. And then, like, if you are actually like a hiring manager who is working in the team, you're probably not gonna day to day think, oh, this is UX, not product. Like you just give that person anything that needs to be done in the realm of like product design. So like, yeah, I don't think that title really matters to anybody anymore except for academics who's studying us from the outside. Like I don't know. I don't know if it really matters. But I think in my mind, if from an identity point of view, like I don't like to call myself a UX designer anymore just because first of all, like UX is like just one consideration in any feature design. It's a very powerful, big thing to think about, but it's not the only thing you would think about anymore. And so you kind of need to show respect to the rest of like the team and the rest of the priorities and be like, sometimes UX, um, what sort of to let this feature succeed in from an all-rounded point of view, UX is just one factor, and there could be other factors that would be more important than UX at this moment. So you can't just be like the UX designer who's always like very stubborn about UX all day long. Like it doesn't work that way, right? So I think like I'd like to call myself a product designer because it positions me in a place where I could think about all of these. Like for example, tech constraints a big thing, right? Like sometimes if you're insistent about UX, then you'd actually sacrifice the cost of like resources you put into technology might like outweigh the benefits you can get from that feature just by like releasing the way you ideally want it to be from a UX perspective. So like you kind of have to juggle and balance so many things. So I think like as a product designer, if you call yourself a product designer, you're in a position to think about it in a more balanced way. That's how I think about it. Also because um, even in the design process perspective, um, there is a lot of like mm, designing features and thinking about it in like code and like in structure and things like this. Um, that it feels more, it's not so much yet, it's a little bit like shedding light for engineering, I think about it that way actually.
Mm,
I think of my role as like before the engineer builds something, you're trying to cover as much bases as possible and shed light in what they need to do next so that they can work as efficiently as possible. And I think that's my I've never really heard anyone else articulate this that way, so I feel like it's kind of my way of articulating it, but I'm sure a lot of people subconsciously feels the same way if they're a designer. And I think that is actually what helped me got the job in the first place. My engineer actually told me that because he said the engineer I worked with for the internship placement. Later on, he told like he was the one who asked to add me as a permanent member of the team because he was like, it's so nice to have someone else think for me. Because otherwise, there was nobody to think for him. Like he had to design as he was going along, and then so I feel like that stuck with me for until now, which is like my role is to help other people, engineers, like think before they build. Yeah,
interesting.
which is similar to architecture, right? Like that's what you do, like when you're designing floor plans and sections and things like that, or like MEP plans, 1 to 20, 1 to 50. Like you're basically trying to map it out before they build it. I mean, it sounds very obvious, but it's such a role. you know,
Subconsciously it carried from
yeah,
architecture to your neuro. Actually, now
yeah.
I'm very curious. Like, what are a successful KPIs for product designer role look like? Like at the end of annual review, like how can you prove you did a great job or bad job? Like, what are those metrics?
Oh my gosh, that's my next article. I don't know. That is, I've done a ton of research on this too. It's you really That's such a good question. We should go out for brunch and talk about this for like an hour. this should be a different podcast, by the way. It should be a whole episode. Um, it's really tough actually because it's hard to measure the metric. I know like for engineers, sometimes their performance can easily be measured by their contributions to GitHub. Like there's, people can easily spot it. Like you can see it. Um, it's I think the more, and then if it's for like a product manager, it's also pretty easy because like you're just kind of like you have to deliver a metric you said you will deliver. Like it's you have full ownership. Designer is a little bit harder because like your position is less. It's like a little bit more indirect influence, and you don't ship anything on your own. And then there are so many different stakeholders who could come in and change. Like you don't have that direct relationship to what gets shipped so much. It's a lot easier when you do. Um, and how much influence you have on what gets finally shipped differs from team to team, right? Like company to company, the dynamics, the politics, like everything can come into play. It is very difficult. In fact, in my last company, the reason why I did so much research into how to measure performance is because I think in one of the companies I worked at in the past, we kind of it's before I came, I asked this question, and then my manager told me that they only measured by the number of wireframes they were able to ship, not ship, but like hand off, because that's the only thing in their control.
Mm.
And that's a really, really, I feel like a less than ideal way to think about it, because you're not like it doesn't say anything about the quality of your design or how much you can drive the business. It's just, and it doesn't even say to like, it's not like a sales quota where you can go out and get the job. Like
Yeah.
someone has to give it to you. So like what agency do you have in this process other than the fact that you turned up every day and did your work? Like so I feel like that was difficult to think about. So I did a ton of like, as a result of that, because I was so passionate about this, I was like, then what opportunity do I have to demonstrate I have done my job, right? So, and also that was after working in a place where I had a ton of agency over my work. So like it was highly measurable how I drove the like moved the needle for that company. So I was like, this doesn't feel right. And so I did a lot of research into this. And then one of the things that I looked deeply into was like UX metrics, and
Mhm.
how they differ from product metrics. Um, and so I have some inkling of an idea of like um, you can actually measure the success of your UX design, um, and then connect it to product metrics. It's a little bit convoluted and high level, um, and you do need like good collaborators to work with you on those things. And it's very idealistic, but technically you can do it. Like you can measure and say like, oh, because of this design, we were able to decrease lostness. Lostness, by the way, has a formula apparently, and that's very useful for marketing sites. You can say people were more satisfied with their experience, which then drove conversions. Like there are ways you can do it. It's still quite hard to keep track with of day to day. Um, and so ultimately in our current company, what um, and I think like as an individual contributor who's not even like super high level, that's very, very difficult to get buy-in from everyone to understand how to read those things. So I think like what my manager in my current company worked with me on is like just a really good sort of we kept aligned on sort of a leveling rubric. That was very helpful because it kind of aligned like what he expected of me and where I am at right now. So this is like, because I think in the end of the day, it's about a conversation. Like, how do people need to, you're demonstrating your value in order for people to understand it. There's no point if you have value and people don't understand it. So like having this sort of platform where they can lay out their expectation, you can tune it with them and then say like, okay, I'm going to strive towards this in the next quarter. If you don't agree, you can hash it out. Like having something very, very tangible is a lot simpler way of put like trying to accomplish the same thing. And in that conversation, like I also was very explicit about this story about how I don't want my success to be measured on just like how many wireframes I'm handing off. And I feel like if you put it that way, anybody with average intelligence and like-mindedness will understand that. Like it's plain and simple. And they're the ones paying you and they don't want you to be underperforming or like feel like you're not delivering your value, right? So they want the best of you too. So I think like if you just share your intentions and brush up on communication skills, I think like things can be hashed out. Yeah.
I see.
Hmm.
Yeah, it makes me wonder. A lot of people do like A/B testing as well, so
Hmm.
it might also help. Like, okay, this design might be performing better, but also
Hmm.
it's you give both recommendations, so you don't know what could have been other possible options in the whole design uh, choice metrics. I don't.
Oh yeah. So I think yeah, again, soft skills, like I think the important thing is to contribute to a conversation. Sometimes it's not about like over dominating it. And that's something that I feel like it's a learning curve for me too. Which is again, this is part of the whole like playing with a basketball team analogy. Like everyone has to come in together um and find alignment and be excited about it too. So like, and again, the same thing. Like if you're saying something, if you're talking sense and people, it shouldn't be hard for anybody to understand it. So it's
Mhm.
on you to communicate clearly and simply, and that's my goal. That's actually my current objective. Actually, just to spill it out there. Like the thing I'm working on, like this quarter or whatever you'd call this present moment, is like how to communicate plainly, simply, effectively, and drive influence and trust in that way. So regarding like A/B test metrics, like I'm not the one who decides on it, but I can definitely steer the conversation by giving in my point of view as a designer, right? And I think my team is quite receptive of that. So like they would pause and like ask like, um, yeah, like, do you have any thoughts on this, right? Like, and so I feel like that's a win. I try to have something that is valuable to say. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes they're the experts, right? Like there are people hired really just to think about this all day long. So, but definitely as a designer, like you know your role and like whatever from your expertise you can contribute to the conversation, that'd be great. But yeah, A/B test is quite gnarly sometimes for various reasons. Um, yeah, yeah. So happy to answer more questions about A/B tests though.
Yeah, and like you mentioned earlier about like you had this capability of understanding the needs of engineers and thinking about them, and
Hmm.
like in architecture we learn about structural engineering and MEP in courses, so we know about
Hmm.
what are good recommendations and what would work. But like for your role, like it would be challenging to need, okay, for this feature versus this design recommendation, how much coding time it will take to build out. So how do you like prioritize your recommendation or have a talk with the engineer about what to build, what not to build?
You know what? Like I actually there's a podcast I was listening. I think in Lenny's podcast. I don't know if you know about this channel, but there's this one guy who was saying that he's an engineering leader. I think he's saying, don't coddle the engineers too much. And I, he's like, we try to protect them too much by saying like, try to minimize scope. And then we also tell ourselves stories like, oh, we want to ship more features, and so make this as sort of easy to ship as we can possible. However, in my experience, I rarely encounter an engineer, and that's because I've worked with some pretty good engineers, I guess. Um, and they rarely would be like finding excuses to not do something. I never get that. Like I've never seen engineers be like, yeah, I don't want to do that. They would if it's something like so out of scope, like so much like it's not part of this feature, and it would be a ginormous scope creep. Yes, then like, but most people are like, yeah, that is, if it's like squarely within scope, most people would be like, yeah, this needs to get fixed. Like, let's fix it, you know? So I kind of work with that sentiment a lot. Um, Again, going back to like plain and simple, like what's the word for it? Dumb, plain and simple. I would say like, you know, a lot of these things are not rocket science. Like if something is broken, clearly fix it. So I think this is what I'm talking about now is mostly like the final phase of implementation, but like top of that production line, I will say like we do a lot of pretty good generative research, and we know what is important. Some things that if you go to Polycam, for example, right now, like not everything is perfect for sure. And but behind that is a lot of conversations about like what's important right now to balance between business needs and user needs. Um, so, or there are some like very clear infrastructural technical constraints that people are still working through. Fixes are coming, like coming our way, but like there's a lot of balancing priorities that the conversations don't. It's not just like happening from one person's brain. Like everyone puts their brain together, and I think we got that sort of workflow pretty much smoothened out at this point. Very happy with that. Um, and then in midstream is kind of like, okay, we've decided what we want to do, let's stick to it. um and what I personally like to do is to be mindful of, if I, you know, break things down into tickets, something that's very very well scoped. If I break them into tickets, then I don't just like have a basket full of tickets like a lottery system, but like have it like lined up in order. So if engineers are following this order and things are getting released incrementally, what you're seeing still kind of makes sense as a user, right? So there could be a dependency or not a dependency, but like something that will take longer to do that is important but is arranged for a later date. Then something that gets shipped before that might need to have some sort of express some sort of caveat, or like it should say, it should still, when it's shipped, that whole experience is still a whole. Like if you have for example, let's give a really good example here. For example, if there is a, what we have right now is like, let me pause, collect my thoughts. Don't know if I could come up with a really good example, but if there is something really complex down the line that says like we need to take this rectangle away, right? For this whole thing to make sense, but that rectangle is like um, really difficult to take out, then in the earlier tickets, there needs to be something that addresses that rectangle when it like gets shipped. You know what
Mm,
I'm saying? Like so that
yeah.
it's not like halfway broken. So that's why like ordering these things are like very very important. Like I think that a lot of teams sometimes forget about like the ordering of how um how implementation is taking place. So yeah, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I was wondering like about scoping, like does it come from the top down, or like engineers or like the product manager decides the scope and then you do UX, and then is there like a scope update as well while during the discovery journey of user interview?
Um, yeah, so there is. I think like it's very much collaborative at this point. So, um, let me think about it. I have worked in many teams before where like it was very one directional. We, the
Hmm.
design or the product, have decided completely, give it to engineers and they execute. Um, That works to an extent, but I feel like it's not super scalable. Like I think for everyone to be happy, everyone wants some agency top of funnel too.
Right.
So right. So like especially if you work with engineers, a lot of them want to have some kind of influence. And I feel like we need to make space for that. And um so I don't have a ton of engineering knowledge, but people who do have said that actually engineers do design as well. So they sometimes have the word design doc. They throw out the word design doc and it can get very confusing. Or even like design system, right? That could get very confusing because like their design system, what they're thinking about is a different picture from our design system. Like they have a code based one. Um, and obviously they overlap, but there are areas which when they're saying design system has nothing to do with me. So there are like the word design gets thrown around a lot in the engineering world. Um, but yeah, people are saying this, which is like, if you look at what engineers and designers are doing, they're actually a lot of the process is the same, but they're happening in parallel, not intersecting together. Um, so I think the important thing here is to respect that. And then in our team, I think there's not a linear process. We definitely come up with um, from design's perspective, we do a lot of research. We figure out what is important from the user's side, and then the engineers kind of also like get involved a little bit in that. They also have very strong opinions sometimes with like design and even like the details down to the details or like just commonsensical user perspective because they use the product too. Like they have a lot of voice in that, and then they take that and then they'd also develop their own design doc or their own RC or whatever it is. And then we do have like pretty good leadership that can actually see into both worlds, the design world and the engineering world. And I think we don't have PMs, but they kind of act as the PM. And because they have that parallel view, I'm not that person, but like then we just have to trust the leader to then organize it and prioritize for us and trust the process from there on, you know. So yeah, so sometimes you relent and then you'd be like, okay, work with whatever this person's decision is. So that's why I say it's teamwork, and it's very hard to say because it's less like one person decides it all. um, yeah, so everyone influences and then one person like makes the call, I guess. Yeah.
Interesting. Like it's great to see like such culture. I also
Mhm.
want to bring up like one of your uh talk,
Oh,
like this
yeah.
article about process and principle, which ties back to what we were
Yeah.
discussing. So
Oh,
as a form, so like what are some major takeaways you want to share about uh this essay?
yeah, I think it's interesting because I wrote this actually before my this was written 2 years ago, so my thinking may have evolved from there. So whatever I just told you is like very contemporary. Like it's sort of my takeaway now working in a much more collaborative team. This was written at a time before I had such a collaborative experience. This was very much like I
uh,
was the one person doing the design, making decisions, and like I could kind of shape the process in a very more direct manner. Um, but I do think this is the part where I felt like things that came very natural to me as an architect in the past um, didn't seem to be something that like the tech world kind of understood as intuitively. From engineering. I don't know what it is. I think it's again like different training maybe, but
mhm.
um yeah, I have to think about this. I think it's just more like being able to systematize, organize, and like prioritize things. Um I think one of the main I through thread I had in the past is that when I got into engineering, oh sorry, not engineering, but like the software engineering world, I realized we over index on the fact that we could constantly iterate. Um, that sometimes things don't have to be perfect when we ship, and we kind of it's the nice thing about tech. There's less pressure because you can always fix things. But in architecture and in hardware or product, you can't do that. you have one chance to get it right. And so much of our training came from how do you get it right the first time, right? Um, but that comes with a lot of responsibility, a lot of technique. I mean, think about annotation. Like as an architect, I remember spending months just to get annotations right. Like I worked in a company in China where I actually had to draw the actual construction drawings, and they brought in someone who's really experienced from an engineering firm. It came in and tutored me on how to do annotations correctly using the Chinese convention. And every jurisdiction has a different annotation convention. Um, that you have to relearn. So if I went back to Hong Kong and I took a construction class there, they would teach me a different way of annotating walls. Just think about annotations, like how hard it is. Here, like we do red lines, is kind of like whatevs. Like I'm just kind of like, okay, as long as you kind of know, I'm okay. And even if it's not perfect, like it doesn't break the experience. Whatevs, like whatevs is the word I use now. But there's so much training that went into like how do you just do things right the first time. I think if you came from manufacturing, anything that has like a lot of compliance and regulation, like you kind of intuitively know how important it is. And I think for people coming in from that world into software, it could be a culture shock because you're like, wow, like it is actually okay to not have things completely perfect when it goes out and meets people, right? And because you can always fix it. I mean, the downside is like the engineers are kind of always on call, right? Like, because then they have to like be there to manage that process. But like, so I think like that was the thing that is valuable, but can be a two-edged sword because you kind of also as someone with that background kind of feel like it's too important to get it right. And that can sometimes backfire on you as well. Sometimes you kind of need to let go and see and absorb the gains that can come from working in a more flexible environment. But there's also something to contribute, which is like um, there's just so much to add for by knowing how to do it, right? Like there's
Mm,
nothing wrong with shipping things right the first time. Why is that a bad thing? I remember in my last company when I worked at Cologne, I actually did like they um I actually did once like release something and it was being used a whole day and I kept saying because it was like a fresh release and I was waiting for people to tell me there are bugs. And people are like, no, there are no bugs. Like this works completely fine. We yeah, this like powered our day's work and it was totally okay. I was like, what? It's totally okay. Like there's nothing wrong with that. Okay. Nothing wrong with
this
shipping things
doesn't
right the
feel
first
right.
time. Yeah, it feels okay for the first time. Like we're okay with what's being released. And so I get a lot of sense of satisfaction when I see things running smoothly. Um, yeah, I feel like sometimes I'm much more an implementation person. I'm not so much the innovative dreamer or like the strategic person. I just like things to work right. That's a very personal quirk though. So yeah.
I see. Yeah, but like it has some great insights on like also how do you hand over and like you went into minor detail about like okay, it felt like people who got into like from design background, UI, UX, and
Mhm.
doing the experiences. Like sometimes we assume like okay, this is the basic spacing or color theming, they would get it, but like the more detailed handoff, the lesser the chances of like miscommunication. And
Mm.
you went into pretty good detail into that.
Yeah, I mean, I would not. I don't think I would have covered 100% myself. There are always edge cases, and I think engineers will find that out themselves too. But like the more you can provide something very structured, the more easier it is for them to find the rest, the 5, 10, 20% of edge cases later down the road because things are taken care of upstream. So I don't cover 100%. Like no, there's no way of finding 100% of the edge cases, and you're kind of not expected to if you're spending like disproportionate amount of time like trying to write out all the edge cases. I have learned that people sometimes think that that is not the best way to use your time. Like you could be doing something more valuable as a designer. So it's like balancing that expectation too. Um, but yeah, I think um, Yeah, it laying out as much as you can is important. I also have, um, and then it helps them. Yeah, if you list it all out, they can definitely build better. I also have like a thing that I personally do, and I don't think I've seen anybody else do that as a designer, but it's very much borrowed from architecture, is this idea of like a checklist. And I know like in PM world, you do have like acceptance criteria, so I kind of lean on that. Um, so I build my own checklist for QA when I am designing. And this comes from architecture a lot because it's kind of like going for a building inspection. You do have your blueprints, and then you're kind of making sure everything ticks the box before you like issue an occupational permit, right? So I feel like that's the idea, and it works serves me really well. It serves engineers really well. In some past teams I've worked in, like they actually like go with that. Like the QA engineer would put like in Jira like the green check mark next to the ones I write. Like, and then it's very easy to find out what's missing. The thing about me is like I don't have really good memory. So like if I hand off something and I don't have that written out for myself, I won't remember the details. Like I personally will not remember them. So I write them out myself. And then I'm often surprised by what I wrote by the time something is in staging. I often surprise myself. I was like, oh, I totally forgot there was this thing that I thought about before. And they're important because like a lot of those minor details have been hashed out. Something that looks really minor could have been 2 hours of discussion time. And if you don't care about it, that's lost. You know, it's
Mm.
just one small bullet, but it could have been a three-way conversation that took 2 days and we totally forgot about it. What a waste of time, like if you're not checking that that thing actually got done, right? So I feel like now, yeah, I always go by a checklist if I can, if it make whenever it makes sense. And then yeah, that covers probably half the game, and then like the QA engineer would cover the other half, and then engineers would find more edge cases. That's kind of like how we do it now. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe like that checklist and detailed handover
Mm.
is one of your secret of, oh, it was right in first place.
No,
I
it
also
is. It
have
is. It is. Goes a long way. Yeah.
yeah, uh, like for people listening, I highly recommend like your Medium articles. They are like amazing, and you have also very
Thank you.
unique background of like working in startups, which
Mhm.
also helps you take like more role and scope.
Mhm.
And this article like talks about it in detail, like if you X team of one, like what are the 11 rules. So, and any high level thing you wanna cover in this one, or like story behind this?
Yeah, this was what I wrote like 4 months into a job. So I haven't worked anywhere else. Um, and there was only one engineer. There was no designer. I basically made up my role. Like I could do whatever I could. It was really fun, actually. I really enjoyed that. Um, I was very proud of um, what like our team accomplished at that time. It was a good moment in my. I really enjoyed that because like I think I was a little bit paranoid too because I just came out from a boot camp and I didn't have a manager that was like squarely owning product. I had a CEO and a COO at the time. But they managed the whole business. It's not like products specific. And um so I was like, if there's no manager, like how do I make sure like I have a really good portfolio project by the time I leave this place? Um and that um yeah, so how do I have a really good project, have really good takeaways, and um so I was doing everything I could to make sure that the experience was really good and that we shipped something really, really good. Um, so that was the place I was at the time. Like I had a ton of ownership over myself and over the features that we were shipping. So I did a lot of things that were very textbook in in my boot camp. So there's like a lot of affinity mapping. Like at that time this is very dated as a as a article, by the way. This is back in 2000, yeah. 2019, very
Nice.
very very old. But it was also very innocent. So yeah, there's like I tried to use design thinking in a very like real life environment. And we actually, people often say that the the double diamond is overrated, it's overused, whatever it is. Like you get a lot of, there's like a lot of backlash that's not very positive. And almost every time I read something like that and people complain about it, I almost feel like it's just because it's not being used to its fullest potential, or just kind of being run in a very routine way. And one of the good things about architecture training is that you can think very critically, right? So you try to get to the point of the process. Like, why are you doing it is very important. So, for example, I did an affinity map here. However, all of the things here came actually from different people on the team who have interacted with our students, who are our customers, or the families. So everything there is valuable. And if we hadn't done this, like people wouldn't be able to share their knowledge of customers. So it had that very tangible value. It definitely upped the game for the team. So like everything here was meaty and we got a lot out of it. And the feature was also very long lived in the end. Um, and so I have a lot of confidence in the double diamond process, should it be done right and not as just a UX performance, right? So, and then this was actually, nobody does this anymore. Like it's what you call it, a wire user flow, I think. Um, but it was actually very helpful for the engineer because it was a very complex system. We had to think about it. And then sometimes when we draw these flow charts, if it's drawn in a way that is very coherent, very consistent, like it's actually useful. Like people can actually read it and be like, oh, pinpoint, this is a question mark. I don't get this part. And you talk about it, and it actually does straighten out the communication. So, like a lot of things, if you use it for its purpose, is actually very helpful. So, yeah, I think I'm just talking again. But here, this
No,
one
no,
is
this is amazing. Like the just like it's a very like hands-on implementation of all the theories you learned in the boot camp. So
yeah, but it's also architecture, right? Because you try to see the purpose in everything and try
mm,
to string it together into a systemic workflow. This one is actually not from Bootcamp. This is actually from academia. You know, like in academia, you have like the grading rubric. So I kind of
mm,
try to try to do that for our product, because at that time one of the problems is that things would get shipped without the engineer would just decide, oh, I'm just going to ship this today, and nobody has seen it before. And sometimes there are some like really big problems with it, just from like content or product or accessibility, different areas, or like there's it's buggy, right? So what I did there, and I've never done this again, but we probably could at some point, which is like after a product gets shipped, everyone comes in, tries it out, and they would then put in their comments. And it's actually broken down into areas. So you have visual accessibility. The marketing person has like a column just for marketing. Like, so everyone comes together and gives it a grade. And it doesn't have to be 100%. Like for some features, things could just be at 70%, and it's just the right balance for it to go out, right? So something shouldn't be over perfect, actually. So this was a way for people to come together and review the feature from their own disciplinary perspective and like comment on it so that we can iterate. So it's not a user feedback, it's a stakeholder feedback. It was incredibly valuable, though we don't do it enough. So, and you would wonder why, right? Like if this was a building or a table lamp, the team would probably do that, because something that's physical is just that much more like weighty, I guess. So yeah, why don't you treat a software product the way you treat like anything else? So yeah.
yeah, and it goes both ways. Like you mentioned, like some of the theories you learned in the UX bootcamp would have helped in architecture. But like these are some theories from
Hmm.
architecture the UX will benefit too.
Yeah. So I think there are things like that. So when people ask me what did I carry over from architecture, it's sometimes very hard to articulate. Like, what do you call these things, right? So, but yeah, yeah.
And I'm just like, you have another one on principles of a early stage product designer, and you,
Mm.
like one interesting like of last year was also reflections on personal branding. It's
Oh
maybe
yeah.
I should like bring that up. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was a year ago. Yeah, I wrote a lot of random things. Yeah, so this one was yeah, thanks for featuring my articles. Feel free to read them. I think a lot of it is just kind of me like trying to organize my thoughts. Um, yeah. So, personal brand, I'll try to think about I have to recall what I wrote here actually. Yeah, so I feel like I say here, it's really much more about it's sort of like how do you think of yourself and what how you want to project into the world and being authentic about it. Um, and I think one of the things that I thought was quite interesting growing up, even going into architecture, was like I got into architecture because people told me that's what I needed to do. Because I liked certain things. Like it came very externally. And when I was in architecture, I tried to convince myself it was something because people kept telling me, I was like, if I don't enjoy it, something is wrong with me. Like, I was like, and then people would tell me things like, oh, architecture is not cut out for everyone. And I took it as if I don't like it, I'm not good enough. But that's not necessarily true. So I feel like it takes a lot of work to find out um, what you uniquely bring to the world. It takes a lot of work and it's not something you could just like come up with, but like there are techniques to figure that out. So for example, you can try many different things, sample different things and like see how you feel about them, like try to really explore yourself. People don't know themselves. I don't know myself either. But once you get it, then I feel like Mayur, you kind of know your thing. Like with your
I'm
podcast and everything.
figuring out.
Yeah, you know your thing. So like yeah, I feel like once you have that then you can start to like make it resonate. Um yeah.
Interesting. Like that. And I also like want to wrap up the session with some learning resources, and
Mm,
uh, I have a rapid fire. So like for learning, what are some resources, be it like courses, books, videos, or
mm.
article you would suggest?
Good question. Books, articles. Let me see. There are several that I like to introduce people to. One is UX metrics, actually measuring. Let me user experience. I think it's the book. I am actually Amazoning this right now. Measuring user experience. It's a very dense book. It's actually kind of expensive too. Now that I look at it, it's like $40. But there is a book called Measuring the UX Experience by Bill Albert and Tom Tullis, apparently. That one I actually recommend. It's not like the go-to book. It's not the ones that people typically recommend for UX designers, but it kind of shows, I think like people get this idea like UX research is kind of this soft, fluffy thing. But like this really brings you back to the scientific side of like quantitative user experience measurements, which can get very scientific. It almost looks like a stats type of mathematical book sometimes, but it's just comprehensible enough for someone who is not super mathematical. But it kind of shows like it's like a big field. It's an introduction to like a very big scientific field, and I feel like those are those are very good knowledge to have for a user experience designer because it kind of centers you. It's like it's not just this fluffy thing. Like it can be measurable. And I feel like as the field developed, people like kind of lament the fact that, user research is declining as an industry sometimes, or is like not valued enough. But I think like we're just become a little bit too generalist, and we just don't realize there's just so much in that area. So like highly recommend it because it also helps you be more critical about your research and what to measure and things like that. And then I took notes on every chapter. It's like a really, really good book. Very classic. And then another one is called like I used to lean on a lot. It's called like Branded Interactions. Let me find this book. I think they also keep updating it too. I have the old version apparently. Also kind of expensive. It's called Branded Interactions, Creating the Digital Experience. Yeah, so that's also a really good book because it has a lot of like it's also design thinking, but it kind of goes a little bit deeper. And it talks about the intersection of like UX and brand too. So it's not just UX, but it gives you all the staples of like all the different tools. So for example, customer journey maps, service blueprints, like it gives you very good examples of how they all should look like. And it goes beyond the digital interface too. So there's a lot more like service design related things in there. So branded interactions is another good one I like to recommend to people. So those are the books. And then yeah, I actually have, if anyone is interested, by the way, like just shoot me a note because I have, if we're talking about like the beginning foundational steps, I actually have a long list of um supplementary information for my springboard students, which I can share with
Oh,
anybody because I feel like they're with so many, they're like the field is rapidly developing and you can't really just get by knowing design thinking. People expect a lot more from junior designers too. So like I have like a whole supplementary sheet for like, good portfolios or like good YouTube channels. I like Famke a lot. So like I said I like to listen to her, if you know who she is. And then uh what else? Yeah, there's some Figma resources there too, because I think the bootcamps sometimes don't teach you a lot of fundamentals, which are very, very important, how to use the software. And it's different from at the, I can't blame them because the curriculum was written several years ago before Figma has so many features. So like we kind of grew with it, but if you're coming in, it can be kind of daunting. Um, but regardless, if you're looking, my one advice is like there's so many resources out there. But oh, I think awards is also a really good one. Just to look at good websites. I like to go to that one. But mainly is that I always tell my springboard students to be careful about what you get inspiration from, because sometimes like people there's like an exercise that would say look for references, and then they would come back with something they found on Dribble that's designed by like, another student. And I'm like, that's not a very good example. Like, if you're gonna look for references, look for books, like make sure they're really, really top-notch sources because they're just like with so much information out there, it's sometimes hard to parse out. So like just make sure you're going for the good ones no matter what it is. Yeah. But yeah, if anyone's interested, just shoot me a note because I have it and it's just a lot. I have it in my Notion. So yeah.
yeah. Thanks a lot for sharing those resources. And like, I'm pretty sure like the books you recommended, like I'm gonna definitely gonna check it out for to see like the metrics and the
Mm,
branded interaction. Uh,
mm.
Last part is you'll have like 5 to 10 seconds to answer, and you gotta keep it super brief. So it's a
Okay.
rapid fire round. Right.
Okay.
So so first is your favorite architect.
My favorite architect. Oh, yeah. My favorite architect is uh they're very close to me. Uh Billy Chin is the name, I think. It's a husband and wife, but because it's rapid fire, I need to I always like forget the full name of these guys. Uh, but they are my favorite. Damn it. Can I look very quickly? Um,
Okay. Technically,
sorry.
it's
Technically, I'm breaking the rules, but I really like them, so I want to find it for you. I am not good at rapid fire and trivias, so I um uh oh give me one sec. Yes, Todd Williams and Billy Chin. Sorry, don't kill me if they hear this podcast, which I highly doubt they will find this podcast. But I really like
we'll edit
them.
this segment.
Yeah, I really, really like them. There are so they designed several of my favorite buildings. One's in Hong Kong, is the Asia Society building, but they actually also designed um the the Asian Studies department in Berkeley. They're kind of similar, but it's their style. But like, I remember going to their talk, and then they just talked about how like they were designing this building, but actually they did a lot of research from a very multisensory point of view. And I thought that was really cool. I think like they like read a lot of novels or something and studied like sounds of birds or whatever it is. And you can really feel it when you walk into the building. It's not just visual. And I think like that's really important because like, sorry, it's rapid fire. I'm not keeping this brief, but I broke all your rules. I'm sorry. But like, yeah, so I'll just round it up by saying a lot of architectural star architect buildings, they just look good on paper because they know not a lot of people will go there to actually see it. So I feel like, this is like highly contrasting that sort of trend. So that's the reason why I like them a lot. But okay, shut up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
uh, Next question is a city you want to travel, which is in your bucket list.
Sorry?
A
Okay, sorry.
city you want to travel,
Mm.
which is in your bucket list.
Oh, yeah. Okay, this is not gonna sound super exciting, but I kind of want to go to Boston because I just moved to New York and I've never been to Boston, and it's so close. I've always almost went. It's like one of those, like I've always almost went there, but I have never been. So one day I will go. Because apparently there's a bus that goes there that's very cheap, and I don't know why I've never done it before. Um, so yeah.
I was there recently, so
Oh,
yeah, I
really?
took the bus from New York. Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
convenient.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I feel like I don't know if I'll be highly disappointed when I get there because it's just like another normal city, but like it's so close. It's just like so close.
Yeah, you would love the MIT and Harvard campus. Those are
Oh yeah, I
beautiful.
should I should check them out. Yeah.
Yeah. Next is your role model.
Oh, role model is a good one. Yeah, role model is I know I'm really, really ambitious right now. There are a couple I feel like in the field of product design. Um, Not super, super like, I mean, I shouldn't say that. It's not like Joe Biden level, like crazy people, but I am looking for people in the field I look up to. I actually have a doc too. Maybe I should, yeah. A lot of people in the field who are working in really good companies, and like I think like Famke is like a very good example of that. But she's not the only one. I have several like clusters of people. Um, and I just feel like they have gotten really good at what they do. Not like, so it's very like attainable, not like people that I will never be the next president of the United States, but like I probably can't either. I'm not born here. But yeah, I think Famke is one of the, I think like a lot of podcasts I'm listening to. Uh I listen to Design Details, so what are those two guys? Brian Levin and what's his name again? Brian Levin's one of them. So I think just like people that I normally interact with on social media because it's a little bit difficult. I feel like there are just like a lot of um there are a lot of product designers. We're all distributed in different companies, and it's important to like find a few people that you feel like, oh, that is where I want to be someday. Um, yeah, and to fix your mind on that. But I'm still prototyping this. Like I'm still trying to identify those people and build, so I don't have a really good answer yet. But the reason why I say I can look up to them is because they put their work out and I can see it. So I'd be like, okay, I can see this, and I like, okay, I can envision myself getting going in this direction, right? So you have to kind of see their work, put your see what they have out there. Yeah.
Got it.
So yeah.
And the last one is, if you had unlimited time and resources, what is one product you would build?
Um, unlimited time and resources. Oh wow, this is a really, really good question. I am still like, I feel like this is a very nebulous thing. If my life was unlimited, what I want to do is I always like dream back to the time when I first started out. Um, and I remember how hard it was to change fields. And I remember feeling like it shouldn't have been this difficult. Like, why is it so difficult? So it is the fact that there are lots of learning resources out there for almost anything you want to do. Um, but design doesn't really have like a licensing thing. You anybody can you just need to learn the skills, find an opportunity, but then how do you prove yourself, right? To get that first job. That's still really hard, and the boot camps are not the solution for this. Um, so we could gather all the resources. There are just so many. You can curate them all you want. Um, but how can you identify, how can a business identify talent or early talent? How can you trust them enough to give them that opportunity? Or how can people like have, we don't have we say it's competitive, but we don't actually have a field for competition. You know, you kind of break your way, you find your way into some company and you kind of, everyone's path is very unconventional, but like, how do you give, I think like there should be a level playing field where people can like have some healthy competition and be able to stand out if they are good. And I feel like that's something that's still missing in the game of like career transition for the field I understand, which is design. So for example, if I could find all the learning resources, but if I had to bridge over and actually get that first job, it's still a challenge. And I don't know I could have made it if it wasn't for Empowerly, which was the first company that hired me, because they gave me the chance. And that chance, they people giving you a chance, the keyword is chance. Like you have had to have lucked out. And I feel
Hmm.
like that's a pain point. Like people shouldn't need to constantly luck out on something. I feel like there
Yeah.
should be a way where people can like have a place to assess their abilities and be able to stand out. And I know, for example, in our company, like if we're hiring engineers, in the past there was Triple Byte, which apparently don't exist anymore, but they had like a way to assess candidates before they hire. We don't have anything like that for design. There's no way to be like, let's assess different aspects of their skills to see scientifically if they can do
Hmm.
this job. Long-winded answer, but that would be the area I would like to tackle. And I haven't, I feel like it just takes a lot of resources right now. And in terms of like expertise, not like in terms of time and money, but more like you need a network of people to come together and be willing to invest time in it, in the assessment like aspect of this idea. Like, how do you assess candidates or assess the talent? Um, so yeah, if anyone miraculously hears this podcast and like decide they want to like team up together and figure this problem out, like let me know because it has been on my mind for a long time. Yeah.
It's definitely an interesting like problem, and like a lot of people would benefit. Like the it would be like help in the matchmaking of like what recruiters want and the right candidates, like with that assessment for that role. So
Mm. Yeah, I think it was the fact that I could come up with a hypothetical project. I could learn how to do it from books and videos. But I missed two things. And I know this because I did architecture. And so you know what you don't have. And
mm,
what you don't have is a venue for critique. And that's why I started Crit Room actually a few years back ago. If anybody, it's not currently actively running. But what we did, it's a very much a pandemic activity where we all zoomed together and like we shared our work and gave other people critique. We're not experts, but it was very like peer level like feedback, which was very actually helpful because people came from architecture and people have different levels of design knowledge. And so we were able to give very good critical feedback for each other, even though we were all beginners. Um, so we missed the critique session. We also miss giving, getting higher level feedback from people who are actually experienced and have the knowledge. And I just remember feeling like, why is it so hard to get that piece, you know?
mm,
Um, and then after you, and then you're also missing a place for people to identify you as a potential candidate or talent to work somewhere once you have mastered those skills too. You kind of need, um, the typical advice is like you have to network and like do whatever or take a couple of like voluntary jobs first or whatever. But that's really like hacking it out, like hacking. And I feel like there must be a way. I was just very passionate about it. Like there must be a way where people can do that without feeling like you have to rely on like a chanced thing for it to happen. So yeah.
there must be a way. Uh, I I must say, like, I had a great time hosting you, chatting with you, and look forward
Thank you.
what you're building and to more Medium articles. Thanks a lot, Lai Jing, for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, no problem. I enjoyed this Saturday chat too. Yeah, feel free to hit me up if anyone here is interested. But like, yeah, I talk a lot.
Yeah. Lai Jing has a website. She's also very reachable on LinkedIn. So whatever medium you're comfortable, reach out to her.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Great.